It's one thing to drown, it's another to drown in poison. In the late 19th century, London was the greatest city in the world. But beneath its marble facades and iron bridges, it hid something foul. A river so polluted it could kill by smell alone. The Thames, the artery of empire, had become a liquid grave. And one September night in 1878, it claimed more than 700 lives in one of the most horrifying maritime disasters in British history. But this is not just a story about a shipwreck. It's about arrogance, neglect, and a river that turned against its own people. By the summer of 1858, London was choking. The heat was unbearable. The stench from the river so thick, people could taste it in the air. The press called it the Great Stink. The Thames, once celebrated in paintings and poems, had turned brown and bubbling, an open sewer carrying the waste of more than 2 million people. At that time, London's sewage system was primitive. The city's countless cesspools overflowed into smaller rivers, which all drained into the Thames. Even the new sewers meant to solve the problem simply redirected filth into the same river, just downstream. Engineers knew it was a temporary fix. Politicians didn't care. Out of sight, out of mind. But on hot days, the problem refused to stay hidden. Gases rose from the surface like smoke from a dying fire. Newspapers described the river as a fermenting heap of corruption. Scientists like Michael Faraday reported that the filth rolled in visible clouds. People covered their faces with vinegar-soaked cloths just to cross a bridge. And yet, this was still the same water people drank from. To save the city from its own stench, Parliament approved an ambitious project: new pumping stations to flush London's waste eastward toward the sea. One of the grandest was called the Crossness Pumping Station, a cathedral of iron and steam designed to carry sewage away on the outgoing tide. It worked, mostly, but not enough. Every day, millions of gallons of untreated waste still poured into the Thames. Even at its best, the system just moved the filth farther downstream, away from Buckingham Palace, but not away from people. By 1878, the river was busy again, ferries, cargo ships, and pleasure steamers cutting through the brown water. Among them was a bright white vessel named the Princess Alice, a popular excursion steamer carrying Londoners on scenic moonlight cruises. Families, couples, and children would board from the city's piers, enjoy live music and dancing, then drift home beneath the stars. It was supposed to be a simple joy, an escape from the smoky city. No one knew it would end in horror. The evening was cool and calm. The Princess Alice departed from Swan Pier near London Bridge, heading downstream toward Sheerness and back again. On board were hundreds of passengers, reports vary between 700 and 900, laughing, drinking, and enjoying the final stretch of summer. They passed Woolwich Arsenal around 7:30 p.m., music still playing from the deck. Lanterns glowed softly in the mist. Below, the Thames rolled thick and black, heavy with the day's discharge. More than 31 million gallons of untreated sewage released from Crossness earlier that same afternoon. Upstream, a second ship approached, a much larger vessel called Bywell Castle, a 900-ton collier that had just finished repainting at Millwall Docks. Her captain, Thomas Harrison, was guiding her home to Newcastle. The Bywell Castle was built for open seas, strong, heavy, and hard to steer in narrow waters. At her bow rose a raised deck, a forecastle, which blocked the view directly ahead. To compensate, a watchman stood at the front, scanning the dark river. As both ships neared Galleon's Reach, the currents turned tricky. The river here curved sharply, one of the most dangerous bends on the Thames. The tide was coming in. The night air was hazy, and neither captain knew they were heading directly for each other. Up on the Princess Alice, passengers danced to a band playing waltzes. A reverend stood near the rail with his 2 children, watching the lights on the shore. Below deck, others enjoyed drinks in the saloon. One steward, William Law, was finishing his shift, clearing tables after supper. He'd worked the steamer many times before. He knew her creaks, her rhythm, her smell. Tonight, Everything felt ordinary. Then, in the distance, a sound, a low, steady rumble, engines grinding against the tide. At first, no one noticed, but then someone shouted from the upper deck, a shadow ahead, a black hull emerging through the fog, the Bywell Castle. The Princess Alice's captain, William Grinstead, reacted fast, too fast. He ordered the helm to swing across the river, intending to pass in front of the oncoming ship. But the maneuver broke the standard Thames navigation rule. Keep to the right. The Bywell Castle's pilot, thinking the smaller steamer would stay to her side, held course. It was a deadly misunderstanding. By the time both realized what had happened, it was too late. From the Bywell Castle's deck, the lookout screamed, "Steamer ahead!" The pilot slammed the engines in reverse. The river boiled with churned water and steam. The Princess Alice's whistle shrieked into the night. At 7:40 p.m., the two ships met in the middle of the Thames. The Bywell Castle's iron bow struck the Princess Alice just behind her paddle wheel, slicing her open almost in half. Screams echoed across the water. Lanterns shattered. The deck buckled beneath dancing feet. Within seconds, water surged through the gap, flooding the saloon. The lights went out. A rush of cold, filthy river poured in. Not water, but sewage. Thick, choking, suffocating. In the chaos, men and women clawed at railings. Children cried for parents. The captain shouted for lifeboats, but there was no time. The Princess Alice was sinking. The collision ripped through the night like thunder. Passengers were thrown from their seats as the Princess Alice lurched sideways, her hull split open. The music stopped mid-note. Instruments scattered across the deck. Then came the screams. Within moments, the steamer began to list sharply to port. Those on the upper deck clung to railings, watching in disbelief as water, thick, dark, and stinking, surged upward through the stairwells. To those below deck, it was already too late. The tide poured in faster than anyone could run. A young mother was seen pushing her child toward the upper hatch, begging strangers to take him. A moment later, the hatch disappeared under a rush of water. Others leapt overboard, desperate for air. But the river itself was a trap. The Thames that night wasn't just cold, it was toxic. A thick soup of human waste, industrial sludge, and oil. When survivors gasped for air, they inhaled the foul vapor rising from the surface. Many didn't drown. They suffocated. From the Bywell Castle, Captain Harrison could barely believe what he was seeing. He'd felt the impact, a jolt, a tearing sound. But now, before his eyes, the smaller vessel was breaking apart. Without hesitation, he ordered his crew to lower boats. Men scrambled down ropes, pulling survivors from the water. They saved dozens, but hundreds more vanished beneath the surface before help could arrive. One witness described it later. The river seemed alive, not with waves, but with hands, hundreds of them, reaching out from the dark. Among those pulled aboard the Bywell Castle was a steward, half-conscious and covered in filth. He whispered only 3 words before collapsing, all gone. Below. On the banks, people heard the screams echoing through the fog. From Woolwich Pier and the nearby ferry stations, smaller boats rushed to help. But they arrived too late. Within 4 minutes, the Princess Alice was gone. The wreck sank in the deepest part of the channel, the exact spot where the day's sewage had been released just hours earlier. Imagine that. The entire tide of London's waste pouring over hundreds of victims, turning rescue into horror. Those who surfaced found no relief. The current was strong, pulling bodies downstream. The water burned their eyes, their throats, their lungs. Some who survived the impact later died of infection, their lungs filled with the poisonous sludge they had swallowed. Among the passengers was Reverend W.J. Davis, traveling with his 2 children. As the ship struck, he sent his son to fetch his daughter from the lower deck. Moments later, the collision came, and the 3 were separated. Thrown into the river, Davis clung to a cable from the wreckage, struggling against the tide. He survived. His children did not. When asked later what he remembered, he said only, "The water moved as if it had life, and it took everything from me." Another passenger, a newlywed named Henry Martin, tried to save his wife as steam hissed from the shattered boilers. They held hands as the deck collapsed beneath them. Rescuers later found their bodies still entwined, washed ashore miles downriver. By midnight, the cries had faded. The tide carried the dead toward Barking Creek and beyond. When dawn broke, the Thames looked calm again, as if nothing had happened. But along the banks, the horror became visible. Hundreds of corpses floated among the debris, hats, shoes, music sheets, and splintered wood. Entire families had vanished in one night. Even seasoned sailors wept openly at the sight. The smell was unbearable. The water, black and oily, clung to the rescuers' clothes. Reporters who came to cover the tragedy could barely stand near the river for more than a few minutes. The coroner himself refused to open water samples at the inquest. The stench was overwhelming. One official described it bluntly. The Thames was not a river that night. It was a grave. Over the following days, bodies continued to wash ashore, at Woolwich, at Barking, as far down as Gravesend. Some were barely recognizable, their faces darkened by the filth. Divers sent to recover valuables reported an eerie scene below. Cabins filled with passengers still standing where they had died, pressed tightly against doors and walls as the ship went down. The final death toll was estimated at more than 700, though many were never found. It remains the deadliest inland water disaster in British history. Newspapers were merciless. They called it the slaughter on the Thames. Editorials demanded answers. How could two ships collide on a calm night in clear weather? Why were there no proper safety lights? And most damning of all, how could London's pride, the Thames, become a river of death? The morning after the wreck, London awoke to headlines that chilled the entire city. Hundreds lost on the Thames. For a river that had always symbolized life and progress, carrying trade, wealth, and history, the Thames had turned overnight into a river of death. At Woolwich Pier, relatives gathered in silence, waiting for news. Every few hours, small boats arrived, bringing more bodies. Some clutched lockets or rings that helped identify them. Others were beyond recognition. Many families never received confirmation at all, only the certainty of loss. The air around the river turned foul for days. Reporters described a black mist that hung low over the water, filled with the smell of sewage and decay. Even the crows avoided the shore. The wreckage of the Princess Alice was later found split in two, her timbers smeared with oily sludge. Pieces of the deck were tangled with silk ribbons, children's toys, and parasols. Silent remains of a night that began with laughter and ended in horror. As the official inquiry began, blame spread faster than truth. The owners of the Bywell Castle claimed they had followed every maritime rule. Their lights were lit, their course steady. The crew of the Princess Alice, however, were accused of cutting dangerously across the larger ship's path. But there was more to the tragedy than a single mistake. London's river was poisoned long before that night. Engineers testified that the tide carried millions of gallons of untreated sewage through the very stretch where the collision occurred. The victims had fallen not just into water, but into death itself. Newspapers demanded reform. Editorials thundered that it was not the captain, but the city, that had drowned its own citizens. One writer asked bitterly, "What is civilization worth if we bathe in poison and call it progress?" For months, the inquest dragged on. Each new testimony revealed another layer of negligence. Missing lifeboats, no proper warning lights, and no life vests for passengers. The Princess Alice had been legally allowed to carry hundreds, yet had almost no safety measures aboard. The final report called it a catastrophic failure of vigilance. But for the survivors, words meant little. Many would never recover from what they saw. Some described nightmares so vivid they could still hear the river bubbling, still feel it burning in their throats. One sailor told a reporter years later, "You never forget the smell. You can wash your hands 1,000 times, but it never leaves you." In the years that followed, London changed. The disaster forced the city to finally confront its poisoned river. New laws were passed. Sewage was to be filtered and treated before entering the Thames. The Crossness pumping station, once a symbol of progress, was rebuilt and upgraded with proper filtration systems. The river that had killed hundreds would slowly, painfully be reborn. By the end of the century, the Thames began to clear. Fish returned. Barges once again carried goods through its calmer waters. But for decades, the locals near Woolwich swore that on certain foggy nights, when the tide was high and the air still, you could hear faint music drifting across the water, like a waltz carried from nowhere. River pilots told tales of ghostly lights appearing in the mist, lanterns swaying on invisible decks. Some claimed to hear laughter followed by screams, fading as quickly as they came. The older sailors said it was the Princess Alice, still sailing her moonlit course through time, her passengers trapped forever in that final night. Even the Thames police, hardened men used to death and darkness, avoided the wreck site after sunset. One officer, writing in his log in 1881, noted, "A strange sound was heard over the water, as if many voices were singing from below the tide." He never returned to that patrol again. Over a century later, the story still echoes, not just as a tale of disaster, but as a warning. The Princess Alice was more than a shipwreck. It was a mirror held up to an entire city, forcing it to see what it had become, a place so proud of its progress that it forgot the cost of neglect. The Thames today glitters beneath the lights of modern London. Tour boats glide where the Princess Alice once sank. People take photos, laugh, and toast under bridges that once echoed with cries for help. But if you stand quietly near Woolwich Reach, when the mist begins to rise, you might feel it, the faint vibration of engines that no longer exist, the soft notes of a band that never finished their song. The water moves differently there. It remembers, because rivers, like history, never truly let go.